what I thought I would talk about today was why write? I mean, why would anybody bother writing in the first place? I mean, I'm talking nonfiction, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll be happy to address that, talk about that, and I have examples that encapsulate what I have to say about writing, and they're all examples of headlines and subheads from articles that either I've written or that I've commissioned in the past couple of years for Psychology Today. And they all demonstrate why you know immediately why you're reading it, what you're going to get out of it. And so, any question related to that or anything else?
Sure.
Writing or editing, fair game. And then you and I think, deserve an offline conversation.
We'll do that as well.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to arrange that.
And I see Clark on the line as well. Hi, Clark. Yeah, so let me actually start with an open-ended question. A lot of writing starts with some idea or insight. One thinks one has an insight or
okay. So you said the magic word, and I'm happy. You have framed my entire conversation for the day. Please continue.
Okay, so an idea might start that way, but then there's this idea that you don't want to just speak out to the open air. You want to connect with an audience. And so it's not just what you think you care about, it's what the audience cares about. Any thoughts on how to connect those two worlds together into what becomes a
Absolutely.
public writing?
That's what my job is. Okay, so let me start where you started, which is idea, insight, okay, which is the short answer to why bother writing at all. And that is because there's a new idea or new insight. Why bother writing to tell people what they already know? Although 99.9% of the pitches I get are from people who want to recapitulate what they know. And I don't want to put down what people discover for themselves. I think it's wonderful, but you have to go beyond that and do research to know what's out there. Okay, what do most people already know? Or what do people in the bracket that I'm trying to reach, what do they know? So it's one thing to know from oneself, and it's another thing to want to speak out to the world. And once you decide you want to speak out to the world, you have to know a couple of things. You have to know roughly, what do those people know? What's their level of knowledge, What's their baseline understanding of, let's say, neuroscience, because that's your domain. What's their baseline level? Do they still think depression is a chemical disease, Where are they on the map of knowledge? That's one thing. And knowing that is critically important, because when you write, you have to begin where your readers are. And so that's the bridge that connects. It's okay, where are they? You can take them anywhere. Mm-hmm. You can take them to the moon and back. But unless you begin where they are, they're not going to jump aboard your traveling ship,
I see. So we could probably talk about neuroscience in a moment, but just to start with psychology, your world, Psychology Today, who isn't interested in some aspect of psychology, and who doesn't think they personally have some insight into psychology? How do you take all of that and turn it into something that's actually useful?
So how do I deal with
what hasn't already? Surely everything that could be said about human psychology has been said in some sense, and yet there's always new writing and new points of view and new stories.
There's always old information, new point of view, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. There's always new information. There's always that new piece of information that reorients all the old information. So you got a lot of ways to tell something. Also, you could have someone's very interesting personal story that's pretty riveting as a frame for new information, new insights. That's a way of getting people into stories. So as I said, 99.9% of the pitches I get are things that I already know, and most people already know. And I don't want to devalue the value of their discovery. It's important for them. I'm happy for them. But most don't know that they need to take the next step and know where other people on the planet are in regard to their questions. So that requires a certain amount of research. If you want to reach out into the world and say something to the world, then the obligation is on you to know what the world knows or what that segment of the world knows, because the people who maybe just read a local newspaper are going to know something different from the people who are reading Nature. And yet, and this is my standard. So my standard is I write so that both the expert and the novice will get something out of what I'm writing. So I want to have enough new information, enough perspective, new perspective on information, as well as bringing everyone up to speed on the information. That takes a lot of skill. And I've talked about how you do that before. I certainly haven't exhausted all of the ways it can be done. But to me, the single most valuable tool in writing, in bringing people up to date and explaining things, is the dependent clause. And this very skillful use of dependent clauses, rather than the flat declarative sentence, is going to be very inclusive. And also, I have to say that I pride myself on doing it with such precision of language, which science, by the way, does not specialize in. It is passive, for a lot of room for fudging, but I aim for active verbs, active muscular verbs, precision of language, so that even the experts get something out of it. So that when I wrote a piece in the last issue of the magazine on the healers are hurting, about the crisis in medicine that preceded COVID, on how doctors practice now, and the competing forces that are playing on them in their new roles, and how they're not trained for that, and how it's creating this moral difficulty, so that there is tremendous burnout and tremendous suicide rates among physicians. So even physicians who read it felt, who are experts on it, who are advancing the cause of seeing it as moral injury, even they felt they got something out of the synthesis and the deep dive and the analysis of the problem and the words used. And words can open up worlds. They can open up new ways of seeing things. So that's a skill of writing so that both the expert and the novice can get something out of it. And it's just skillful pulling in of information and really a lot of hard work of synthesis and analogy.
You said something earlier about dependent clauses versus declarative sentences. Can you give an example of what you mean by a dependent clause there?
No, but I'll probably pull something. My head is a little bit.
Yeah.
But
I guess declarative sentence is just like declaring some fact.
Yeah, declarative sentences are fine. They have their role. But a steady drumbeat of declarative sentences is going to numb anyone. And you need to vary tone, you need to vary rhythm, you need to vary type of sentence. But also, it's not just for the musical variation that you're pulling someone along, that's helping pulling someone along in your article. You're working the information in. Dependent clauses become very useful for working information in so that someone who already knows the information doesn't feel like an idiot reading it. It's kind of slid in, but everyone is getting the message of that information.
So
but
little tidbits for the experience for the experts, but enough context for the new people.
Right, and hopefully I'm using language so that it opens ways of seeing for the experts as well. And I'm sure when I look at articles, I'll come up with hundreds of examples. And knowing that you're interested in that, I'll be happy to go over stuff in detail with you about that. But
I have lots of questions, but maybe let's hear from others.
No, feel free to ask.
Okay.
And then
yeah, well, if others don't have questions, I'll pose another. Any others out there?
I just want to say hello first and foremost.
Hello.
The questions that I have for you are, it's not so much stumping the editor, it's just being able to, and I'm asking you these questions to be a better cultural writer.
Right.
Okay, so that the conversations that I have inside my head about cross-cultural communication, which is very much about what my life is about, different languages, different cultures.
Right.
Can you give me just like a trick on how to pull a golden thread through a conversation? For example, I'll give you an example. We have Shabbat dinner, so there's like 15 of us at Shabbat dinner, and we weave in and out of 5-6 languages and accents.
How lovely.
It is. It's absolutely lovely. Right. And it's just that in order to write that into a scene or weave it into my memoirs or weave it into a story that I'm telling, I know that I have to start with the foundation of it way before I get to that scene, because it's like, yes, that's my question. That's my question. Go ahead.
No, you don't have to. You can start anywhere. So, I mean, this is the beauty of writing. You can start anywhere. This is why writers always have such a problem beginning, because you don't always start at the beginning.
Right.
You jump into the middle, but you have to cover the beginning.
Right.
So you can start anywhere as soon as you very quickly set that scene and very quickly get back to the beginning and pull someone through the story. Now, there are lots of beginnings, and beginnings are, I mean, are you talking about beginning time-wise? Are you talking about beginning idea-wise? I mean, there are lots of beginnings. So when I say you have to take someone from the beginning, whichever thread you're deciding to pull on your story, you do have to take someone to the beginning of that thread, unless you are such a successful and gifted mystery writer that you want to leave the beginning for the, or some very interesting detail for the punchline at the end. But that takes an enormous amount of skill.
No, I don't think I want to get there on the first.
Yeah, there are very few people who can do that.
No.
Trust me.
No,
and it's
I didn't.
not something I do.
No, I'm this is what I've done, is like I've collected blocks of stories and blocks of thought, and like I write and then I have something else, and so it's almost like, so I'm a designer by trade, so I'm a custom clothing designer. So this is, to me, is almost like designing a garment. So designing this book is like designing a garment.
Right.
And I give you this analogy because I go, oh, I really love that sleeve, or I love those buttons, or I love, so the life of a person has all these layers and tangents and art, you know. So I've been collecting for years and years and years, and a lot of the collection has been happening by going through old photographs. Like, remember when we still had photographs and we would
Right.
So it's now coming to a place where they're slowly falling into place as to where they go. And so that's why I'm asking you some of these questions, and I think I'll be asking you lots and lots more questions.
That's fine. Were you on last week? Were you?
Yes, and I loved it, and it was phenomenal, and it gave me a lot of insight.
So I took the 5 stories,
Right.
And each one of them began in a different place.
Right.
And that was my decision. So what I did, and what I often do when I'm doing an article that's very rich with either people's experience or some phenomenal things that people have told me, no matter what about the topic that's under discussion, I will often aim for that very distinctive phrase, that's going to hook someone. Okay, so I wrote an article on Alzheimer's disease, okay, on basically looking at Alzheimer's disease as a preventable condition that occurs. There are many contributions to it. Yes, the common thinking is that it's the buildup of certain toxic materials in cells and between cells in the brain. But that, if you take it back one step, raises questions about the brain's housekeeping. And if you take that back a couple of steps, it raises questions about the energy conditions of the brain, both the energy getting to the brain and in what form, and the receptivity of brain cells to its major fuels, and the efficiency of the fuel system, the mitochondria in the brain. This is heavy duty molecular biology stuff, okay?
Yeah.
I began my article with 2 words: hell no, okay? Because they were the most interesting words. They were spoken by a neuroscientist, a neurologist, who in the course of an interview told me, when I asked him, did he think that Alzheimer's disease was inevitable even in people who are, we're talking about over 65 Alzheimer's disease, not early onset.
Early onset.
Not early onset, which is a very genetically loaded condition, but common dementia, which is over 65. And I said to him, and we know that there are a couple of genetic variations that contribute to risk. And I said to him, do you think it's inevitable, even in that Alzheimer's disease is inevitable, even in those people who have genetic risks for the disease? And he runs a clinic filled with these people. And his answer was, hell no. And I took that and ran with it. And I thought, that's the most concise statement I'm going to have about anything. And I started with that, just picture it in big letters, hell no. Usually that's how we begin an article, with some big display type. And then I backed into, basically what I just said: no, not even in people who are genetically loaded. About the single most common concern of people as they age. and Alzheimer's disease. Everybody's afraid they're going to lose their mind. And then I sort of worked up to, you know, the idea that people are working at all different kinds of levels, and it doesn't look like this is what people thought it looked like. And then from there, I went in depth into 4 or 5 different avenues of exploration that kind of fed into a common pathway for thinking about Alzheimer's disease. So, you know, you can begin anywhere, and you can take the most interesting thing that someone says. If you can find a way into that, and then to broaden it, and then go into the details to tell your story in full, that's how you structure an article.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
They say in screenwriting that you should arrive late and leave early. That is, the audience shows up when the action is already underway and leaves before everything's fully concluded. And part of that the early phase of the storytelling is the audience trying to figure out what's going on. Is that true of written storytelling as well?
Mystery. It's always the mystery piece, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, I think that with writing, anything is fair game. Any way of entering that you can capture someone's attention is fair game. You can begin anywhere. You can begin at the end. I've begun stories at the end. There are stories you tell where everybody knows what the ending is, right? And we, you know, when we read a biography, we know how the story ends.
Well, the movie Gandhi started at the end.
Pardon me?
The movie Gandhi, you know, Gandhi is eventually assassinated.
Right.
It starts with the assassination, and then the whole movie leads from there.
Right. And so, yes, because how does a man of peace, you know, it's a very interesting journey. How does a man of peace wind up having a violent death? That's a very rich terrain to dig through. And, you know, there are lots of ways to tell that story. You know what? There are 1,000,005 ways to tell any story. And you never have to begin at the beginning. But sometimes beginning at the beginning is the right way. I was going to say it's definitely the beginner's way of doing it. But it isn't always the most interesting way. And sometimes it is the best way. And so there are no set rules.
And I guess in journalism, they say that a story should start, or an article should start with a hook that it connects to some like recent current event. Is that true for magazine articles as well, or not necessarily?
I'm not going to buy into that under any conditions, because we have all seen articles that begin with a quote or that begin with some historical detail. No, it's not true. I did a piece on the 25th Amendment. You know, are we going to, Trump made us all wonder about the 25th Amendment and how it works and whether it's time to invoke it. And I, who am not essentially a historically focused person, given all the information, you know, what happens is I get a PhD with every article that I research, and then, you know, short-term memory, it's held there, and then whoosh, flies out the next article I'm doing. So for about a month there, I was like your go-to expert on the Constitution and the 25th Amendment. And all the information I gathered from really important, extraordinary people, I began that article with an event of what at Ronald Reagan, no, it was Bush. So, okay, this is counterintuitive. It began with when the history of the, you know, presidents is written, W is likely to go down as the most psychologically enlightened president. Counterintuitive. But I then went into this episode where he underwent surgery, and each time he gave up voluntarily gave up his power to the vice president. No one else has done that. And even Reagan didn't do it when he was losing his mind. And I later on tell that. But so I went into a little historical sort of glitch, and only because it was counterintuitive to think of W as one of our most psychologically enlightened people. But he was. It was a strategically and very psychologically enlightened act to take.
So when you're starting to put words
as you
to paper,
can tell, I don't think that there are any rules for how it must begin, because the minute you tell me there is one rule, I'm going to show you the opposite. And it's the skill of the writer and the depth of the knowledge and how facile a writer can be with the information to make a bridge from wherever the writer's fancy lands to wherever the piece needs to go.
When you're starting to put words to paper, are you imagining or visualizing or conceptualizing your audience, or are you starting with what you want to say and then later on thinking about how to fit it to an audience?
So yeah, that's a great question. And I'm sure when you give a talk, and I'm assuming you've given talks, right? So when you give a talk, you've got to have an audience. You've got to be looking at someone. You got to be connecting with someone. And I'm usually always writing for someone, even if it's for myself. And there's always some personification at the tip of my fingers, the point of my pen, whatever. Actually, I really do love writing on a computer because you're not penalized for refining and thinking and perfecting. I think it's just a wonderful instrument for that.
So do you sort of imagine like a particular person with a particular life story who like has this particular, question or something on their mind, or are you thinking about more like a population of people, like, people of a certain age and a certain life situation, sort of imagining more kind of broadly?
No, I might imagine someone I know. I might imagine myself. I might imagine, no, it's a much more general thing where I want to please someone and entertain and inform someone, rather than I'm glad you brought that up, because I try not to write parochially. And if I know that I am writing for a particular audience, I want anybody to be able to read it and get something out of it. So that's why I will use every literary device known to man and beast to load my stories with information, with rhythm, with everything, sound, visual imagery, the sound of people's voices, and of course, always the importance of why they're reading it. That has to be up front. Otherwise, why would anybody devote however much time it takes to read what you're saying? It's got to be implicit, if not explicit.
I see. And people also talk about voice in writing. What's the voice? Is it professorial? Is it a fellow traveler on a journey? Is it discovery? Is it sort of expert? What is there, like one voice that's the best voice, or how would you say, what are the different style of voices that people can adopt that work for a broad audience?
So I'm very impressed at the knowledge you have of clearly this is not your first rodeo. Clearly you've done some research. You'll clue me in later as to how much background you have in terms of writing, and knowing about writing. But in terms of voice, my first inclination was to say to you, every time out, I have to find the voice that's right for that piece. And sometimes I have the voice before I have the article. Sometimes I find the voice when I'm in it. Sometimes, so I was lucky in what I did last week was I showed 5 profiles of people for an article that's in progress, actually, for Psychology Today, in an issue that will be out, I don't know, September, I guess. And that's an article on resilience. And so I talked about that. But those 5 portraits of people who went through some kind of very interesting experience and came out of it with something positive, accompanied an article that could have been the world's dullest article on resilience. And when that article on resilience came in, it's 2,500 words, it knocked me for a loop. I'm hard to please when it comes to writing and editing. That piece knocked me for a loop because it had one gorgeous voice, seamless from beginning to end. And I knew it, and I knew it had to have been written in one sitting because one doesn't sustain a voice like that. So sometimes you get a voice, and that voice just, you're in that voice, you know, it's almost like you're possessed by it, and that voice kind of carries through, and it helps pull out the thoughts and the way you express things. So in my experience, though, voice, I have to find a voice with each article. No, that's
each article, so it's not your voice. It's not one voice that carries through all of your writing. It's specific, possibly, to the article.
Well, when you look collectively at my writing, you will be able to detect certain patterns. For example, certain kinds of verbs, very powerful verbs, okay? Not a lot of florid use of adjectives. Surprises, twists, ironies, certain particular phrases, I guess, that might recur.
And then
certain way of using quotes. So people will find distinctive elements, but I don't, and maybe, a smart voice, but no, I am not setting out with my voice to tell every story. I hope I'm using a voice that grows out of the nature of what it is I want to tell people about. I wrote a story on grief. There is no way that article on grief is going to have the same tone, the same voice as an article on the 25th Amendment. Sure. Same person telling the story, but look at yourself and look at your own experience. You don't have the same voice in every experience of your day, do you?
Sure.
So I don't see that as an imperative in writing.
I see. Now, when you're in the role of an editor, let's say a piece comes your way, and there's something about the voice that just isn't working. It's like too stiff, or maybe it changes voice midway. Do you find that you have strategies for nudging? Is that something you can fix if the content's good?
Absolutely. I fix that a lot.
Do you fix it just by redoing it or by offering gentle suggestions?
It depends on who I'm working with. So if I'm working with someone who I know is going to get what I'm saying, so here's what I do when I work with someone. A piece will come in, and so if I feel that the major problem is that it's just too stiff, I will talk to the writer.
Mm.
And with any luck, the writer will say to me, can I take another crack at that? But if I'm in talking to the writer, I get a sense that even if the writer gets it, they might not be able to pull it off.
Mm.
I don't find that a hardship. It's just part of my job. I try to leave what I can, but I will, there are things to change that make it a little warmer or a little more flexible. And that to me is bread and butter editing. Mm. I do get things on the other end. Sometimes so experts tend to err on the side of stiffness, and sometimes some writers tend to err on the side of flabby writing that doesn't have a lot of information in it. Mm. That to me is a much bigger problem.
Right, you can't create information where it's missing.
No, I often do. I mean, I don't even want to tell you how much research I do, just to fix any ordinary article. But yeah, I mean, I do not assign an article without giving the writer sources of information. Mm. So that should be a suggestion that this has got to be content rich. And I will explicitly say that. Mm. But it doesn't always come in that way. You're right.
I see. Because one thing I notice in public writing in terms of style, let's say journalistic writing, what's important is the style is credible. With opinion writing, often it's, people are after like forceful and authoritative. Magazine writing, I guess, is often called breezy. Not sure what that means. I guess it means easy to read.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what magazines you read, but the magazines I spend time on, you don't want people to stumble and have to use a dictionary of every other word. But they're not too breezy. These are not breezy pieces.
New Yorker is not breezy, I guess.
I don't think the New York Times magazine is very breezy. Mm. I don't want Psychology Today to be breezy. I want you to be able to get through it. And I'll use every device I can to help you get through it.
So breezy's bad. I thought breezy was good. It's like fun to read.
I don't want everything to be fun to read. I want things to be interesting to read. I want people to sometimes say, wow, or gee, I didn't know that. No, breezy is not what I want to pull people through an article. I want to use everything to, pull them along. But breezy is not my goal. If you want breezy, go to the beach.
You like informative and something that I guess is captivating. It sounds like I hear a lot about like capturing, drawing someone in,
and also wit. I'm big on wit and funny, and serious without being solemn. But breezy, I don't know. Tell me what breezy you like.
Well, sometimes an article is just sort of, fun to read, and I'm sort of going along on a journey, and it's like has some like twists and turns, but I'm not struggling with the material. I'm not like having to try to decode what the writer is saying.
Totally, but is that breezy? To me, that's just good writing. I wouldn't call that breezy. You know, I would just, I never want a reader to struggle.
Mm-hmm.
But Breezy, you
Like
know.
European writers, I know this with French writers quite a bit, are fascinated with sentences that might be 4 or 5 lines long and have 5 subclauses, and it can be, you know, challenging sometimes to decode those sentences. Whereas I think maybe I read the book Ogilvy on advertising, and his whole book is written in the style of advertising writing. There's no sentence with more than 10 words in it, and it's easy to get through. You get his concepts quickly, but it's amazing what you can do with short sentences.
Wow. So I haven't read it, so I'm not commenting on that. But I would say that there are a lot of ways to get people through an article that do not limit you to 10 words. I would say that there's rhythm. And, you know, I spent my first 12 years reading poetry.
Mm.
And when you read poetry, you understand what rhythm can do to help a reader move through words.
Mm.
And so I hear, so I have the sound of things. Sometimes I know, okay, you might blanch at this. Sometimes I know what things are going to sound like before I know what they're going to say.
Mm.
I know what I have to say,
Mm.
but I know what it sounds like.
Mm.
And I put the rhythm down before I put the words down.
Rhythm. What is, so I hear rhythm a lot in movie editing, this idea that, you know, the sort of the points in a story sort of have a certain flow and a pace. What does that mean in text?
How
The printed
you're
word.
pacing the information, how you're using the language, how you're delivering the scenes, because you're going to have scenes as well. How you're sort of the tempo of revelation versus analysis, and the sound of things, and I don't have to limit sentences to 10 words to accomplish you getting through something easily. Okay. One of the things I often hear from people is, wow, so there's a skill in connecting one thought to the next thought so that they're all interlaced. And that construction pulls people through.
Like themes that reemerge?
No, I think you're separating things into, maybe you've been overeducated in tools that writers have. I'm thinking a little bit more globally, in that you have an idea, and the ideas link to each other as they go through, and they arise out of each other, and they're like cemented together. There's a mortar that holds them, and when you and so you're automatically propelled into the next one. And whether it's the words or the language or the flow of the information or the sound of people speaking, you're pulling someone through that way.
Nice.
And it will be all of those things that help pull them through. It's not going to be one. It's not going to be just one item.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if the online world has changed writing. Either made it shorter and snappier, less long form. You know, maybe people's attention spans are shorter. Attention has to be held so they don't click away to something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some truth that it has shortened attention spans, and yet there's a very big appetite for long form. Lots of people are reading it. I mean, the feature articles in Psychology Today range from 3,000 words to, my doctor's article was 5,000. We don't usually go to 5,000, but 3,000 to 4,000 words.
That'd be like 5 pages on a print magazine?
Well, we're art intensive, so it'll be 10 pages magazine.
Yeah.
Lots of other publications have articles that length, but so blogging has changed people's expectations of writing.
Lower them, I assume.
You said it. I mean, as you know, there are good bloggers and there are a lot of not good bloggers. What pisses me off most is, let's say I want to cook something, and I'll type in maitake mushrooms. The last thing I want to read is someone's lousy blog on mushrooms before I get to a 4-item recipe, where basically I want to know, how long do you cook it, and what are the various ways you can cook it. And when you just the cook side of me, just having gone through so many bad blogs, nothing against it, but everyone feels like they're a writer and that they can write well, and it isn't necessarily true. And but so many people are encouraged to do that. So yes, what you say is right, that there's a lot of bad writing on the web, but shockingly, there's also a fair amount of good writing on the web.
For sure.
Yeah.
As a magazine article, what's your feeling about listicles? A great structural content that engages people, a travesty that's part of our new reality.
So you want to know what literally first thing I thought when you said listicle? Wow, I haven't heard that word in 2 years. That was the first thing I thought. It was like, wow, listicle. We talked about listicles years ago. I have not heard the word in 2 years.
Is that because they're so pervasive, they're not worth a word to mention? The top 5 ways to do whatever. The 3 best something.
Those aren't articles. Come on. There's some other little mouths full of information, but they're not. I wouldn't call those articles, really. It's some other form. So.
And I don't know if we had other questions from others. I guess those do at least provide a structure, like people like something in a set of things that claim to capture the whole of something.
Yeah. So here's
whether it's the stages of death and dying. That's a set.
Yeah. So here, I want to go back to what you opened with, like insight. Why anyone would take up the pen. So what I did, I don't know if we can screen share here. I don't know if okay. So you can see the quest to cure PTSD. Okay. So the answer is to why write? Because there's a new piece of information. I mean, people think post-traumatic stress disorder, without belittling it, is a pretty heavy condition, and it's pretty intense for those who have it, and by its very nature. And so why write? It's to deliver some new information here that it may even be possible to stop it before it starts. I didn't put everything that's new into that subhead, but some of the most amazing ways of thinking about PTSD is using ketamine and other psychedelic drugs.
Yeah, I've been hearing about clinics in LA exploring that.
Yeah, right. But and various other psychedelic drugs that seem to open new pathways to help, which in combination with intensive in the moment psychotherapy get people to help people through these very intensive courses of psychotherapy that get them over PTSD. So they're short, intensive combinations of psychedelic drugs and intensive psychotherapy, and having remarkable results.
Yeah, it's a new world.
Yeah.
A lot of organizations have opened up research. It's amazing that what was once a sort of a deep freeze and the sort of acceptability of even talking about those topics has now become
exactly
lively progressive research.
Yeah. So for so long, so this is a whole new wave of research. I mean, psychedelics were like, man, the dirty word, God, so I'm looking here to find other articles to show you here. Put on my screen to share. Okay. This one's about puberty. So can you see that now?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the age of puberty is dropping, and so even when
so these are starting with some a suggestion of a new development that leads into everything else. I see. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you for sharing so many points of view and insights into the writing process.
Thanks for being here.